They said Blackwood House had been empty for 50 years, that no one who entered ever came out the same. Some never came out at all. Mark, Jenna, and Ryan thought it was just another urban legend, a ghost story meant to scare kids. But when their friend Ethan dared them to spend the night there, they couldn't say no. After all, it was just an old house. What was the worst that could happen? The drive to the house was uneventful. But as soon as they crossed onto property, a sense of unease settled over them. The towering Victorian structure loomed against the dark sky, its windows like empty eyes. The wind howled through the trees, whispering secrets in a language only the dead understood. "You guys feel that?" Jenna whispered, rubbing her arms. "Like something's watching us?" Ryan scoffed. "It's just the wind. Come on, let's get inside." They pushed open the heavy oak doors, which groaned in protest. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and decay. Their flashlights cast eerie shadows along the peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. "Let's set up in the living room," Mark suggested. "We'll record everything. If we see a ghost, we'll be famous." Famous was the last thing they would be. Hours passed with nothing but eerie silence. They laughed at their own paranoia, telling ghost stories to pass the time. But then Jenna's flashlight flickered and went out. A deep, guttural moan echoed through the house. "Did you hear that?" Mark whispered. Ryan swallowed. Probably just the house settling. Then the temperature dropped. Their breath curled in the air, and that's when they heard it. The creak of footsteps. Upstairs. Jenna grabbed Mark's arm. "We are not alone." Ryan, ever the skeptic, shook his head. "All right, let's check it out." They climbed the grand staircase, each step protesting under their weight. The hallway was lined with doors, all slightly ajar. Mark pushed one open. Inside was a nursery. A crib stood in the center, draped with tattered lace. A single wooden rocking horse swayed gently back and forth. "The wind," Ryan muttered. Then Jenna screamed. They turned just in time to see the closet door slam shut behind her. "Jenna!" Mark pounded on the door, but wouldn't budge. Inside, Jenna gasped for breath. The air was thick, suffocating. She fumbled for the doorknob, but something cold wrapped around her wrist. A whisper caressed her ear. "Mine now?" Mark and Ryan finally broke the door down. Jenna stood there rigid, her eyes vacant and black. "Jenna?" Mark whispered, her lips curled into a grotesque smile. "She's not here anymore." Then she lunged. Mark and Ryan stumbled back as Jenna's nails raked across Mark's arm, drawing blood. She let out a guttural laugh before sprinting down the hall, moving in ways no human should. "We need to get out of here," Ryan panted. "Not without Jenna." Jenna, or whatever had taken her, vanished into the darkness. They searched the house, finding cryptic messages carved into the walls. "Leave, run, die." Then, in the attic, they found the old newspaper clippings. "Blackwood Family Massacre." Mark read, "Parents and child found brutally murdered. No killer found." A faded photo showed a woman with hollow eyes, a baby in her arms, the father's face scratched out. Beneath the picture, a handwritten note. "She took my baby. She wants another." A sickening realization dawned on them. "Jenna!" She's gonna take Jenna. Following the sound of humming, they found Jenna in the basement, kneeling before an old wooden cradle. A shadow loomed behind her, a tall, gaunt woman with empty sockets for eyes. "You can't have her," Mark shouted, brandishing a rusty iron poker. The figure turned its hollow gaze toward them. "She is already mine." The walls trembled. The air grew thick with whispers. Ryan grabbed a can of salt from an old shelf and threw a line between them and Jenna. The entity shrieked, recoiling. Mark yanked Jenna away. She convulsed, coughing up black bile before collapsing. "We need to go. Now!" They ran. The house shook with fury. Shadows clawed at them from the walls. The doors slammed shut just as they reached them, but Ryan kicked them open. They tumbled onto the lawn, gasping for air. Jenna stirred. "W, what happened?" Mark hugged her. "We got you out." A deep, furious growl rumbled from the house. The doors burst open, revealing the silhouette of the eyeless woman. Then the house collapsing on itself, as if it had never existed at all. Days later, they tried to put behind them, but Jenna wasn't the same. She barely spoke. She wouldn't eat. Then one night, Mark woke to a chilling sight. Jenna stood over his bed, staring down at him, her eyes black as coal. She said, "You should have left me behind." The lights flickered, the shadows moved, and Mark screamed, "You should have left. You never left." A sudden, violent gasp. Mark wakes up in bed, drenched in sweat. The nightmare isn't over. Mark, Ryan, and Jenna had survived Blackwood House. Or at least, they thought they had. Days had passed since their escape, but the house wasn't done with them. Mark found himself waking up at odd hours, always hearing that same whisper, "You should have left me behind." His apartment grew cold at night. No matter how high he turned up the heat, he began seeing shadows moving just beyond his line of sight. Ryan was having worse experiences. He'd wake up to find his furniture rearranged. His bedroom mirror cracked one morning, deep claw-like gashes marring the surface. He swore he saw something crawling on his ceiling one night, something with hollow eyes. And Jenna was no longer Jenna. Jenna barely spoke. When she did, her voice came out wrong, distorted, layered, as if someone else was speaking with her. "I don't feel like myself," she whispered to Mark one evening, staring blankly at the TV, which flickered between static and an image of Blackwood House. "We need help, Jenna. We need to talk to someone about this." Her head snapped toward him so fast he swore he heard a crack. "No one can help us." Then she smiled. That same grotesque smile from the night at Blackwood House. Mark recoiled. "Jenna." She stood up abruptly. "She's coming." The lights flickered. The television screen distorted. And in the reflection, Mark saw a figure standing behind him. Desperate, Mark and Ryan sought out answers. They found an old historian who had studied the legend of Blackwood House, an old woman named Evelyn Carter. "You entered that house?" she asked, her voice laced with horror. "You fools. We need to know what's happening to Jenna," Mark said. "We need to know how to stop it." Evelyn sighed. "The entity in that house is known as the Mother. She lost her child to disease long ago. In her grief, she made a deal with something dark. Now she feeds on the living by stealing their souls." Ryan paled. "How do we stop her?" Evelyn's face darkened. "You don't. You run, and you pray she doesn't follow." Mark shook his head. "That's not an option. She already followed us." Evelyn hesitated, then finally said, "There's only one way. You must return to Blackwood House. You must perform a severance ritual. And if you fail, she will take all of you. The house should not have been there. It had collapsed before their eyes." But as they arrived back at the cursed land, the Blackwood House stood tall, untouched, as if it had never fallen. "It's waiting for us," Ryan whispered. Jenna, silent the entire drive, suddenly walked forward without hesitation. "She's expecting us." The front doors creaked open on their own. They stepped inside, torches flickering against the rotting walls. The air was heavy with whispers. Shadows moved unnaturally. And then they saw her. The mother stood at the top of the stairs, her eyeless face twisted into a gaping maw. In her arms, a bundle wrapped in cloth. A decayed baby. "Give her back." Mark shouted. Jenna turned to them, her face blank. I belonged to her now. Ryan pulled the salt and candle from his bag, forming a protective circle. Mark held the ancient text Evelyn had given them, beginning to recite the severance incantation. The house screamed. Walls cracked. The floor trembled. The mother let out an inhuman screech, rushing toward them at an impossible speed. Jenna convulsed, her body writhing, her mouth stretching wider than humanly possible as black bile poured out. "Stop," she howled. "Let me go." Mark didn't stop chanting. The shadows thickened. The mother clawed at the barrier, screeching in fury. Then Jenna let out a piercing shriek and collapsed. The house imploded, swallowing the mother in a vortex of darkness. And then silence. Jenna gasped awake. Mark and Ryan held her, relieved. They had done it. They had severed the connection. Or so they thought. As they drove away, Jenna looked at her reflection in the car window. For a split second, her eyes went black. A whisper echoed in her mind. "You never left." The screen fades to black. The whisper returns. "I am still here.